The crowd roared online, hashtags exploded, and headlines spread like wildfire as David Miller said, "It was just a joke." The laughter that once filled comedy clubs had turned into digital torches and pitchforks. Sarah Carter whispered to herself, "They won't stop until he's gone." The night sky outside his apartment window mocked him with silence. Each notification on his phone felt like a dagger. Jonathan Reed, once his closest friend, sent a single message that read, "Can't be seen with you anymore." The betrayal hit harder than the mob's fury. Emily Clark said, "David, you need to stay offline," but her words drowned in the storm of buzzing screens. Every meme carried his face twisted with ridicule. Every retweet sealed another nail in his career's coffin. His manager's voicemail echoed, "We can't represent you anymore." His reflection in the darkened glass looked like a stranger, a man already erased. The world had turned, and his name had become poison, his laughter now a curse. David Miller scrolled through trending feeds, his name plastered on every headline like a scarlet brand. He muttered, "They don't even know me," but the noise drowned his words. Sarah Carter sent a message that read, "Stay quiet, let it pass," yet she knew storms only grow stronger in silence. Jonathan Reed posted a vague statement about values and professionalism, which everyone knew was aimed at David. Emily Clark called late at night, her voice breaking, "Please don't look online." His heart raced, not from fear but from betrayal, the sting sharper than the memes. Robert Hayes left one final email, its subject line clear, termination. The silence of family weighed heavier, no defense, no comfort, only the void. David whispered to himself, "Am I already gone?" The world outside his window sparkled with nightlife, but David Miller sat in shadows, scrolling endlessly. Sarah Carter said, "People forgive, right?" But her voice trembled with doubt. Jonathan Reed posed for a smiling selfie at a corporate event, while captions praised his leadership, contrasting David's downfall. Emily Clark slammed her phone on the table, muttering, "They're hypocrites," as tears welled in her eyes. Robert Hayes received applause at a meeting, congratulated for decisive action, though his face revealed unease. David whispered, "I gave them laughter, and they gave me silence." David Miller's phone buzzed again with another viral clip, his face replayed in humiliation. Sarah Carter wrote in her journal, "He doesn't deserve this," while hiding the page from view. Jonathan Reed rehearsed a speech on integrity, rehearsing in the mirror, while his eyes flickered with guilt. Emily Clark whispered to herself, "I won't leave him," but fear still cracked her voice. Robert Hayes avoided calls, convincing himself he did what was necessary. David muttered, "Even silence screams louder than their words." The night stretched long as David Miller stared into nothingness, replaying every moment. Sarah Carter said, "He was more than a joke," clutching her chest with quiet pain. Jonathan Reed signed a lucrative deal, a smile wide as he toasted his glass. Emily Clark stood outside David's building, debating whether to knock, tears blurring her vision. Robert Hayes sat at his desk, staring at David's name removed from the roster, the cursor blinking in finality. David whispered, "The world laughed, and I disappeared." David Miller sat with a scrapbook of old photos, his younger self smiling with the confidence of a man who believed the world loved him. He whispered, "When did laughter become a weapon?" Sarah Carter recalled the first time she saw him perform, writing in her journal, "He gave people light, but they burned him with it." Jonathan Reed in an interview said, "We all must choose our words carefully," while sidestepping his betrayal with charm. Emily Clark remembered their late-night conversations, her voice trembling as she muttered, "He only wanted to make people laugh." Robert Hayes shredded old posters of David, convincing himself it was necessary. Alone in his room, David muttered, "I was never the villain, but they painted me as one." His chest ached with the weight of fading memories, each page of the scrapbook another reminder of how far he had fallen. The sound of applause echoed in David Miller's head, memories of packed clubs filling his mind like ghosts. He whispered, "They cheered then, they curse now." Sarah Carter said, "You were more than the jokes. leaving a voicemail he never answered. Jonathan Reed laughed in a podcast, telling stories of their past but omitting David's name. Emily Clark stood outside a comedy club, saying to herself, "He deserves to be here, not erased." Robert Hayes shook hands with new talent, pretending not to hear David's name whispered in the crowd. David pressed his palms against his ears, trying to block out phantom clapping, muttering, "I gave them joy, and they gave me silence." The past felt alive, but the present was unbearable. David Miller replayed an old recording, his younger voice bright with energy. He said, "Good night, you've been wonderful," and the crowd erupted in laughter. Tears blurred his vision. Sarah Carter sat at her kitchen table whispering, "He was joy itself." Jonathan Reed rehearsed a new act, his smile wide, but his words hollow, as though haunted by the shadow of what he erased. Emily Clark scribbled furiously in her notebook, writing, "I won't let them forget him." Robert Hayes received flowers for discovering fresh talent, each bouquet a reminder of the career he ended. David whispered, "That was me, wasn't it? The man they loved." He closed the laptop, but the silence screamed louder than the applause ever had. In the park where he once practiced lines, David Miller walked slowly, hands buried in pockets, voice low. "Do they even remember the man behind the joke?" Sarah Carter called him, saying, "Please don't let them take your soul," though he never answered. Jonathan Reed strolled into a studio interview, polished and glowing under spotlights. Emily Clark sat on a bench across from David's building, watching lights flicker inside his apartment. Robert Hayes avoided a journalist's questions, muttering, "No comment," as cameras flashed around him. David stood still under the fading sunlight, whispering, "I am more than their laughter, but they won't see it." The world kept moving, but he felt frozen in a frame of loss. David Miller sat at his childhood piano, pressing keys slowly, each note trembling with memory. He whispered, "I used to dream in melodies, not headlines." Sarah Carter said to her reflection, "The world is cruel, but he is not." Jonathan Reed smiled for photographers, his hand raised in victory as if he had won something invisible. Emily Clark, through tears, recorded herself saying, "David is still human, though she never posted it." Robert Hayes poured himself a drink, muttering, "Business is survival," while his eyes betrayed guilt. David's fingers hovered over the keys, the silence stretching heavier than any song. He whispered, "Do they remember the man who once dreamed?" David Miller's phone buzzed with another alert, a sponsorship company releasing a statement cutting ties. He muttered, "They didn't even call me first." Sarah Carter texted him, "I'm still here," but the words felt small against the storm. Jonathan Reed was invited to replace David at an upcoming charity event, his smile plastered across glossy posters. Emily Clark whispered to her reflection, "They erased him, but they can't erase the truth." Robert Hayes signed new contracts, his signature shaking for just a moment before he steadied his hand. David scrolled through a thread of insults, each word cutting deeper, each laughing emoji a dagger. He whispered, "Every screen is another battlefield, and I'm losing everywhere." His chest tightened, the silence of his apartment pressing against him like walls closing in. David Miller walked through the grocery store, hood pulled low, whispers following him down the aisles. He muttered, "I'm still human," as a child pointed and asked, "Isn't that the man from the joke?" Sarah Carter held her phone tightly, resisting the urge to post in his defense. Jonathan Reed shook hands on stage at the charity event, saying, "Integrity matters more than applause," earning a standing ovation. Emily Clark argued with friends who told her to distance herself, shouting, "I won't abandon him." Robert Hayes sat across a boardroom table, ignoring a colleague's question about David's downfall. David clutched a carton of milk, his hands trembling, as strangers' eyes burned into him. He whispered, "I can't even buy groceries without their judgment." David Miller opened his inbox to find old social media posts resurfacing, headlines screaming his name again. He muttered, "They're digging up ghosts." Sarah Carter left him a voicemail, her voice trembling, "Don't let them bury you alive." Jonathan Reed smiled during an interview, dismissing questions about his past with David by saying, "We must evolve beyond mistakes." Emily Clark slammed her laptop shut after reading cruel articles, muttering, They want him destroyed. Robert Hayes quietly forwarded links of old posts to a journalist, telling himself it was only business. David's breath grew shallow as he read line after line, whispering, "They don't want truth. They want blood." The air felt heavier, as though his own walls had turned against him. David Miller's sister, Anna Miller, stayed silent, ignoring reporters outside her home. Her silence screamed louder than words. David whispered, "Even family hides from me now." Sarah Carter typed a long post defending him, but deleted it before pressing send. Jonathan Reed posed for glossy magazine photos, captioned as a voice of responsibility. Emily Clark recorded a podcast defending David, her voice raw and trembling, though she doubted anyone would listen. Robert Hayes poured wine at a networking dinner, smiling as colleagues praised his decisive action. David sat on his couch staring at his phone, no missed calls from family, muttering, "Their silence is my sentence." David Miller walked through the rain-soaked streets at night, headlines glowing on digital billboards, each one bearing his face. He whispered, "I can't escape them." Sarah Carter, standing by her window, muttered, "He doesn't deserve this storm." Jonathan Reed raised a toast at a gala, his laughter echoing, the crowd cheering as if celebrating David's erasure. Emily Clark sat at her desk, clutching a pen, whispering, "I will not let his story die." Robert Hayes leaned back in his office chair, staring at his phone, avoiding calls from reporters demanding comments. David stopped under the neon glow, drenched, whispering, "Every step forward feels like sinking deeper." The city swallowed him whole, a man erased in plain sight. David Miller opened an anonymous email late at night, the subject line reading, "You should know the truth." His hands trembled as he read documents showing Jonathan Reed had leaked his joke to the press before it ever went viral. David whispered, "It was him all along." Sarah Carter sat in her car outside David's building, rehearsing the words, "You need to hear this," but fear kept her inside. Jonathan Reed laughed on a late-night talk show, his charm blinding the audience, while guilt flickered in his eyes for a fleeting second. Emily Clark scribbled furiously in her notebook, muttering, "There's more here than they see." Robert Hayes paced his office, muttering, "This isn't good," knowing his fingerprints were on the deal that let Jonathan rise. David whispered, "I wasn't destroyed by strangers. I was destroyed by someone I trusted." David Miller scrolled deeper, finding messages between Robert Hayes and Jonathan Reed, plotting opportunities from his downfall. His voice cracked as he muttered, "They made me the sacrifice." Sarah Carter recorded a voice memo saying, "David, they set you up, but never pressed send." Jonathan Reed smiled into cameras at a charity gala, his arm around influential figures, reputation gleaming. Emily Clark posted a cryptic message online. "Truth has a way of surfacing." Robert Hayes deleted files nervously, whispering, "No one can trace this back to me." David's chest tightened as he whispered, "I thought it was the world, but it was my own circle holding the knives." David Miller replayed Jonathan Reed's public interviews, syncing them with the leaked timeline. The realization hit hard. Jonathan had fueled the storm while smiling for cameras. David whispered, "You used me." Sarah Carter muttered, "If only he knew sooner," her hands shaking as she deleted yet another unsent post. Jonathan Reed rehearsed in front of the mirror, muttering, "Perception is power," his smile never faltering. Emily Clark pieced together clippings and articles saying, "This isn't coincidence, it's a plan." Robert Hayes leaned into his desk, face buried in his hands, whispering, "We went too far." David whispered, "The mob was just their weapon, and I was the target." His pulse raced with both rage and despair. David Miller confronted his reflection, whispering, "I let them write my ending." Sarah Carter finally dialed his number, but hung up before he answered. Jonathan Reed toasted champagne with executives, laughter echoing under chandeliers. Emily Clark said, "The truth can't stay buried forever," as she uploaded her first recorded podcast episode. Robert Hayes stared at an envelope filled with cash, muttering, "I chose profit over people." David whispered, "The betrayal hurts more than the hate," his voice breaking. The storm outside rattled his windows, echoing the war inside his chest. David Miller sat at his desk, piecing together the timeline with shaking hands, muttering, "I was never their enemy. I was their ladder." Sarah Carter whispered into her journal, "The truth will break him before it saves him." Jonathan Reed's face filled television screens, hailed as an icon of integrity, though his eyes betrayed the weight of deception. Emily Clark uploaded evidence anonymously, saying, "The world needs to see," her breath unsteady. Robert Hayes locked his office drawer, whispering, "It's too late to undo." David whispered, "The world wanted a villain, and they gave them me, but now I know who wrote the script." His tears mixed with quiet determination. David Miller stormed into the comedy club where his downfall began, his voice trembling. "You laughed when I was theirs, now you laugh as I burn." Sarah Carter pushed through the crowd, shouting, "He deserves to speak." Jonathan Reed smirked from the back, arms crossed, whispering, "This is desperation." Emily Clark stood near the stage, her phone recording as she muttered, "Let them hear the truth." Robert Hayes shifted uncomfortably in the audience, whispering to a colleague, "This wasn't supposed to happen in public." The crowd fell silent as David's voice cracked, "You crowned me a villain, but I was framed by my own friend." Gasps rippled through the room, cameras flashing, every face locked on him. His chest heaved as rage and sorrow collided in his voice, echoing through the walls of the place that once held only laughter. David Miller's words cut sharper than any headline. "The joke wasn't my crime, the betrayal was." Sarah Carter clapped through her tears, yelling, "Tell them, David." Jonathan Reed forced a smile as cameras turned toward him, his jaw tightening. Emily Clark raised her phone higher, whispering, "The world needs to see this." Robert Hayes pulled his coat tighter, muttering, "This will ruin everything." The crowd erupted into divided voices, some booing, some cheering, all hungry for drama. David's fists shook at his sides, his voice trembling but fierce. "I was cancelled by greed, not by laughter." His eyes darted toward Jonathan, locking onto the man who lit the fire that consumed him. The confrontation was no longer private, it had become spectacle, live and raw. David Miller pointed toward Jonathan Reed, his voice shaking but powerful. "He fed the fire, and you cheered while I burned." Sarah Carter cried, "It's true," as her voice cracked over the noise. Jonathan Reed laughed coldly, saying, "Proof is nothing without belief," while cameras zoomed in on his calm mask. Emily Clark shouted, "I have the evidence," as she streamed the confrontation live, her hand trembling. Robert Hayes slumped lower in his seat, whispering, "We should have buried this deeper." The crowd erupted with chaos, phones raised, flashes burning brighter than stage lights. David's chest heaved as he roared, "I gave my life to make you laugh, and you made me your prey." His words echoed, heavy, raw, impossible to ignore. The club shook with divided chants, some shouting David's name, others jeering. David Miller's eyes glistened. This was never about a joke. It was about betrayal. Sarah Carter reached for him, whispering, "Don't break now." Jonathan Reed leaned back, sneering, "You're destroying yourself." Emily Clark held her phone higher, her voice shaking. "The truth is out, whether they believe it or not." Robert Hayes stood, sweat beading on his forehead, muttering, "I won't be dragged into this." David slammed the microphone onto the stand, his voice thunderous, "I will not vanish in silence." His shout reverberated through the club, louder than the claps, louder than the hate, louder than the shame. The moment froze, David Miller standing defiant, drenched in sweat and rage. He whispered into the stunned silence, "You will not erase me." Sarah Carter shouted, "You're not alone," her voice breaking through tears. Jonathan Reed clenched his jaw, his calm mask cracking as whispers spread across the audience. Emily Clark pressed upload on her phone, muttering, "The world will see this live." Robert Hayes walked out quickly, his face pale, whispering, "This is the end for all of us." The crowd fell silent, phones raised, the weight of the truth filling the air like smoke. David's voice cracked one last time, "The world will remember my fall, but they will also remember who pushed me." The words lingered, heavy, undeniable. David Miller sat alone in his apartment after the chaos of the club, the silence louder than the applause or the jeers. He whispered, "I told them the truth, but the truth doesn't heal." Sarah Carter left a message, her voice breaking. "You still have me, no matter what." Jonathan Reed flipped through online headlines that now carried his name alongside David's, muttering, "They won't see me fall." Emily Clark refreshed her phone, watching views skyrocket on the video she posted, whispering, "The truth is finally out there." Robert Hayes stared at his desk, resignation letter unsigned, muttering, "There's no undoing this." David closed his eyes, his chest heavy with both relief and sorrow, whispering, "I am free, but broken." The world debated fiercely online. Hashtags now split between outrage and sympathy. David Miller muttered, "They fight over me, but not for me." Sarah Carter defended him on social media, her words raw. "He was betrayed, not evil." Jonathan Reed delivered a statement, polished and rehearsed. "This is about accountability, not blame," though his eyes betrayed fear. Emily Clark sat in her small studio, whispering into her microphone. "This is the truth they didn't want you to hear," her podcast voice steady but heavy. Robert Hayes avoided reporters outside his office, muttering, no comment as flashbulbs blinded him. David watched from afar, whispering, "My name is their war, not my life." David Miller's sister, Anna Miller, finally called after weeks of silence, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you." Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "Your silence hurt more than the mob." Sarah Carter muttered to herself, "At least he isn't alone anymore." Jonathan Reed rehearsed a new speech in his apartment mirror, muttering, "Stay calm, stay untouchable." Emily Clark smiled faintly as her podcast climbed charts, whispering, "The truth is breaking through." Robert Hayes poured a drink, staring at the phone ringing with his boss's number, muttering, "This is the end." David leaned back, whispering, "I've lost everything, but maybe I've gained clarity." David Miller walked through the park at dusk, the same place he once practiced lines. He whispered, "I'm not the man they erased. I'm still here." Sarah Carter sat on a nearby bench, watching him from afar, whispering, "Don't give up, David." Jonathan Reed attended another event, smile wide, but eyes darting at every camera, paranoia creeping in. Emily Clark typed fiercely, whispering, "His name won't vanish into silence." Robert Hayes stared out of his office window, whispering, "I chose wrong, and I can't take it back." The fading sunlight painted David's face in warm glow. As he whispered, "They can't erase what still breathes inside me." David Miller returned to his piano late at night, pressing the keys with trembling hands. He whispered, "Not for them, just for me." Sarah Carter listened to the melody through a crack in the door, tears streaming silently. Jonathan Reed scrolled through his phone, headlines now questioning his integrity, muttering, "This isn't fair." Emily Clark posted another episode, whispering, "Every story deserves truth." Robert Hayes cleared his desk, whispering, "This chapter is finished." The melody filled the room, fragile yet alive, as David whispered, "They took my laughter, but they can't take my voice." The sound was both broken and beautiful, a resolution that lingered with ache. David Miller stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, whispering, "They wanted a villain, and I became their masterpiece." Sarah Carter wrote in her journal, "The world forgot his heart, but never his mistake." Jonathan Reed rehearsed new lines, his smile practiced, but his hands trembled with unease. Emily Clark whispered into her microphone, "History will judge them, not just him." Robert Hayes packed a box of belongings, muttering, "Careers end, but guilt lingers." David closed his eyes, the mirror's fractured glass splitting his face into pieces. He whispered, "I am no longer whole, only fragments they left behind." David Miller walked through the city streets at dawn, the neon lights fading into gray morning. He whispered, "They still carry my name like ashes in the wind." Sarah Carter left a message on his phone, whispering, "Please don't disappear completely." Jonathan Reed scrolled through comments, his name now trending with whispers of betrayal, muttering, "They don't know the truth." Emily Clark uploaded her final podcast episode, whispering, "He was destroyed by betrayal, not humor." Robert Hayes stared at headlines, questioning his role, muttering, "You can't bury everything forever." David's footsteps echoed against empty sidewalks, his shadow stretching long behind him. David Miller returned to the club one last time, its empty chairs facing the stage like silent witnesses. He whispered, "Once they cheered, now they haunt." Sarah Carter sat in the back row, tears glistening as she whispered, "He deserves peace." Jonathan Reed faced flashing cameras outside a studio, reporters asking, "Did you betray him?" His silence answered louder than words. Emily Clark said softly, "Every story ends, but truth remains," as she listened to her episode go live. Robert Hayes avoided calls, whispering, "The truth is too close now." David placed his hand on the microphone stand, whispering, "My voice was my gift and my curse." David Miller sat on a park bench beneath a gray sky, rain threatening to fall. He whispered, "They erased my laughter, but they cannot erase my existence." Sarah Carter walked past quietly, whispering, "Don't let them win." Jonathan Reed signed autographs, but each flash of a camera revealed cracks in his perfect mask. Emily Clark wrote, "This ending belongs to him, not the mob," her pen trembling. Robert Hayes poured another drink, muttering, "We made him the sacrifice, and now we live with it." David's face tilted upward as the first raindrops fell, whispering, "This is the cost of a joke." David Miller returned to his piano one final time, fingers trembling as he played a broken melody. He whispered, "The world took my stage, but not my sound." Sarah Carter leaned against the doorway, whispering, "You're still here, David." Jonathan Reed turned off his phone, the noise too loud, his silence finally louder than his lies. Emily Clark whispered, "They will remember this, not as a joke, but as a tragedy." Robert Hayes sat alone in his office, muttering, "Some ghosts never leave." The final note lingered in the air, trembling, fragile, haunting. David whispered, "I am the punchline that became the warning."